Welcome to this extra special bonus episode of MudderRucker, the only podcast dedicated to Irish women's rugby. However, this week we're looking a little broader to World Rugby policy. Women's rugby has organically always been a tolerant, accepting and diverse space. In a world where we're expected to fit neatly into gendered stereotypes, rugby has been a safe space to push those boundaries, and it has attracted many women who do just that. In recent times, however, trans people, and in particular trans women, are being targeted by political movements that seek to isolate and alienate an already vulnerable minority. Some say that women's sport and women's rugby is being weaponised for that cause. In May 2021, World Rugby announced a new policy banning trans women from participating in women's rugby. It cited the welfare risk of size, force and power-producing advantages conferred by testosterone levels during male puberty. However, the players have never been consulted on these policies, and it has been done without their consent. Many have already voiced their disapproval, and now the players are pushing back. On June 1st, this coming Sunday, a team of cis women will face a team of trans women in a game of sevens rugby at the Union Cup in Oslo. The purpose is one of inclusion, protestation, allyship and camaraderie. It aims to dispel myths and to make a point. In this episode, we explore the trans ban and whether the basis for the ban is even sound. We will hear from those it directly impacts, whose voices have been ignored. And we will hear from a leading expert in exercise science who consulted with World Rugby before the ban came in. Here are their voices. Joining me to discuss the upcoming match, the impact of the trans ban in women's rugby, and the myths and truths about trans participation are, firstly, a seasoned rugby player with 26 international cap. She represented the USA's women's national team from 2015 to 2024, including a fourth place finish at the 2017 Rugby World Cup here in Ireland. She played in England's Women's Premiership for 3 seasons and is currently playing with France's Elite One League side Stade Bordelais. Former collegiate All-American and USA Under-20s player, she began her rugby journey at the University of Connecticut. Off the field, she founded the XV Foundation, which works to secure diverse and sustainable funding for the national team. She also promotes a grassroots rugby through coaching and refereeing and works as a commentator and public speaker. Based in New Haven, Connecticut, welcome to the podcast, Eagle number 237, Alycia Washington.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a great intro. I appreciate you putting that together so nicely. Thank you.
As well as that, joining us for her third stint with MudderRucker is now friend of the podcast, Ilse van Staden. Ilse is a butcher on an organic farm in Northern Ireland, though she hails originally from South Africa. Not content to excel in just one sport, Ilse has won 6 caps with the Irish women's national team, as well as representing provincial rugby in Ulster and the Blue Bulls Rugby Union in South Africa. She has 140 appearances there. Still feeling the itch, she took up American football as free therapy and plays for local team the Antrim Stags alongside the men. She also plays across the water for women's team Peterborough Royals and international team the Sealand Seahawks. She's so busy her wife sometimes struggles to remember what she looks like, and I have a feeling that your wife had an input on that. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Yeah, nice for having me. Yes, Alana did write that because I am really bad at writing anything about myself. I don't know where to start, and I don't want to sound too big-headed, mostly.
So, you're too humble.
Just a little bit.
So, coming to you first, Alycia, you've competed at the highest level of sport, including the 2017 World Cup, as we already spoke about, in the English Premiership with the Barbarians 3 times, and now you're playing in France. What has drawn you to the Ruck You match, and why does it matter to you?
Well, that's an interesting question because I everything about it speaks to me, and I just don't understand the idea of exclusion. I don't understand the idea of making a blanket statement for all people, and maybe as a Black female competing in a largely white sport, and you just look at the history of sport and you could see women were banned from sports for so long, Black people were banned from sports for so long, and if we don't coalesce around each other, then what do we have? We don't have what we know and love about sport, which would be truly tragic to lose. And it just feels like there's only one correct side of history here, so I may as well advocate for my trans brothers and sisters in any way that I can, and I'm happy to do it. So yeah, it sort of, it feels like I didn't have to make a decision to support. It felt like of course my teammates need help, in the same way I would do that on the field, in an 80-minute game. I'm going to do that off the field however I can.
For me, I think it has to be the same thing. I've had discussions with people about this in the past, about, what matters more. Is it, perceived safety? Is it perceived fairness? To me, the perceived fairness is inclusion. Exclusion is a matter of unfairness. Touching on the topic of safety, though, Alycia, as a player, playing against trans people, does it feel unsafe to you?
Absolutely not. It does not feel unsafe to me. I have played against trans players in the past, and I never felt unsafe. I do understand, like, I'm privileged to be about 200 pounds. Sorry, I'm not sure what that is in kgs at the top of my head for the Irish audience, but or audience anywhere else in the world. But I am about 6 feet tall, and I feel like I have largely been the size outcast in the sports that I've played before rugby. Before rugby, I did gymnastics and I did field hockey, where I was just so large and I felt excluded by that. And then when I joined rugby, I felt so included by my size and privileged for my size that I feel I would never want someone to experience how I felt in gymnastics in rugby. This is a place where every size and shape is welcomed and accepted and valued, and has a position on the field, that it just makes sense for me to include everyone. And with that, I have never felt unsafe. There have been size mismatches between, me and the opposite scrum half, where she could look at me and be like, I feel unsafe because Alicia's on the field. And that's never been the case. Like, I could literally be twice her size, twice her weight, and it's never been an issue. In the same way, someone could weigh more than me, someone could be a bit faster, a bit stronger, or not than me. And, you're not sitting in the locker room looking at their stats saying, well, it's unfair that they're this size. You still have to catch the ball. You still have to be good at the game. You still have to be skilled enough. And those have, to me, never been a factor when I've weighed up my competition and wondered how, quote unquote, unfair it is for me.
Your position appears to be one very much rooted in empathy for other people. Do you think that's something that's just completely lacking in these discussions? I think from my perspective, I see a lot of othering. We're talking about trans people. We're very rarely talking to trans people. We're very rarely talking alongside those trans people. Do you think that empathy is something that's missing from these discussions?
Yeah, and I think it just comes from, I would say it has to be fear, because, you're not talking to the people, you're not working with them, you're not finding solutions, and you're probably also not speaking in scenarios based in reality, because the example is always like, okay, so you want a professional man playing for England to hop over to the Red Roses. Like, no one is saying that is what's going to happen. And I would honestly bet if you offered most people, if not all people, $1 million to transition and live life as the opposite sex, from all the advantages, disadvantages, all of it, from the hormones to the surgery to all of it, even that $1 million, euro, pound incentive would not be enough to make someone transition who wasn't already trans. So it's just a crazy thought to me that people will have this like sort of boogeyman trans person under the bed ready to get you in the middle of the night aspect of these like made up stories, when that's not the case. Like, you even see even individual sports where a trans woman is playing but still being second, third, fourth place to a cis woman. Like, these, it's not just because someone who was born male transitions to a woman and joins women's sports that they're immediately amazing and advantage. Like, the number of disadvantages along the way to get there are so plentiful that once they do get there, we need to give them a hug. Like you made it here. You made it to who you want to be. You are 1000% living the life you saw for yourself, and that should be celebrated, not feared.
It's very interesting there that you brought up the point of, this myth that men are just going to pretend to be trans or become trans in order to compete and succeed in women's sport. Interestingly, I'm not sure if you know of Ben Shapiro in the US, who is,
Yeah.
a right-wing reactionary who likes to push a lot of false narratives. He tried to create a documentary many years ago where he actually tried to pay men to transition to become a woman to compete in baseball. It since became a work of fiction because he could not convince one single man, and he tried, he could not convince one single man to do that, because obviously people aren't going to go through that. They're not going to put themselves through all of that just to prove a point or to succeed in women's sport. And at the end of the day, these kind of men, they don't care about women's sport in the first place in order to want to succeed at it. Even when you're really trying to drive a political point home and you're really, really on the cusp of getting all of that attention, you still can't get anybody to do it. I think that tells a real tale in that this isn't what's happening. All of this fear-mongering, and all of these tropes are just not rooted in reality. I do wonder, Alycia, you're playing this match on the 1st of June in Oslo. Do you think that that it could be damaging in any way if, for example, there is one of the players gets injured by a trans participant? Because that kind of, these anecdotal points get used and conflated and made into something bigger than it is, when in reality, if I played against you, I'm guaranteed to get injured. It doesn't mean that you're unsafe in the sport. It just means that rugby injuries happen. Do you think there's any danger of that narrative being twisted?
There is always a danger of that. And, I think to be frank, there's a bit of stress that, I could get a hangnail during the game and it could be sensationalized into Alicia's thumb got ripped off by a trans player. There is, I myself am not worried for what's going to happen on the pitch. I have been injured in rugby. I had an ACJ repair dislocation last year because one of my cis female teammates fell on me essentially while I was on the ground, and you just realize accidents happen, rugby happens. I'm signing up to play a contact sport, and that's just the nature of the game. I am not worried about what's going to happen on the pitch, but any sensationalism creates views, right? And exposure and all of that stuff that people use to profit from having factless opinions online. So I'm more concerned about how any small thing, even who wins the game, how many tries were scored. If someone's clips a highlight from one of the trans players, great for that player, but I would almost just be concerned about how that's turned. But in terms of my thoughts about the game, I'm nothing but excited and just really, really pumped to see, the product out there. I'm most of all more concerned that it's sevens than having anything to do with playing against trans athletes, because your girl's up there now. This will be my very last game of rugby that I will play, and it's sevens, and I am just hoping that I have the lungs to get through 14 minutes of rugby.
It's the hardest 14 minutes you'll ever play.
Any sevens game feels so much longer than a 15s game, but
it does. You need serious aerobic capacity. It's good. Ilse, coming to you, you and I have spoken at length about gender expectations in sport and the policing of gender and its impact on the people who don't ordinarily conform to these really, really kind of narrow gender guidelines that society places on us. You've personally dealt with some of these issues, and the increasing intensity, I suppose, of it has impacted you personally. Can you take us how through that has impacted you in your sporting and your personal life?
So, like you guys can see, there's very little that, if you look at me, I present as quite masculine. even though I'm a cisgender female, born female, has always been female, and will always be female. So the biggest issue came, and it was in the run up to the Olympics. As a younger player, I never really experienced this until the spotlight started to shine on the inclusion of trans athletes and how they are now becoming part of sport. And again, I am up for let everybody play. Rugby is a game where everybody is welcome. Sport is a vehicle by which we include people who are marginalized in society, who has nowhere else to go. It brings people together. It creates communities. And the positives of sport outweigh the negatives, like injuries. Like, you will always have friends. I think, Alycia, you're like me in that, as someone who is a foreign player playing in an island, I knew that wherever there was a set of uprights, I was between friends and I was always welcome there. And wherever you go in the world, if there's a set of uprights, you are always between friends. Something that happened to me recently is like the fact that I increasingly cannot use the ladies' restroom. You get constantly reminded that, excuse me, love, you are in the ladies' changing room, or you're in the ladies' toilets. And there are days where I simply just blank it out and go on. But there's also days where I feel like I literally want to expose myself in public to say, what are these? But yeah, it has a massive impact on me as a person. You feel anxiety, wanting and needing to go to do the most basic of bodily functions. And it's not a place where I don't want anybody else to feel like that. So that's why my whole life is around including people and making people feel safe in my presence.
I think I've argued certainly that women's rugby is probably even a heightened version of that, because, you know, women who would typically defy those gender expectations or push those gender boundaries often gravitate towards rugby because it's probably considered by many to be the least feminine of sports. You know, it's very contact heavy, it's very aggressive, and the more aggressive you are, often the better you are at the sport. I think certainly that, you know, a lot of people find their sport when it comes to rugby. I know I certainly did, and I'm very much feminine presenting, but as a gay woman, when I found rugby in college, I gave up Gaelic football. I'd been playing Gaelic football from the age of 9, and very, very successfully, county teams and championships and all that. I, within 3 weeks, just went, I don't have time for all the sports I'm playing. Out goes Gaelic football, in comes rugby. And since that day, it has been an obsession of mine, to the point that I now have this podcast. You know, women's rugby, it is all embracing. You feel a comfort when you're surrounded by people who are like you, and I think organically it just draws people who don't always adhere to those gender norms. Obviously, there are some who do, but it's not always people who do. Ilse, do you find more recently that your experiences are becoming more and more common or more intense? Is this only in recent years since the trans ban? Is it before that?
Well, I would say my whole thing started around the time that I was playing international rugby, where there was especially in 2017 when the World Cup was here in Ireland. There was a bigger view on us. People saw us. We were, I'd say, Clea Maloney was on a bus stop throughout Dublin and Belfast. You couldn't move to see Clea's face, and I think since then there's been a bigger interaction with people, especially on social media, with women's rugby, and it's just growing. It's growing year on year. We are now, there's contracted teams, there's people who play women's rugby professionally. When I started 25 years ago, I never would have dreamt of watching professional women's players compete. So yes, there's an increase in it. You can see it. I'd say you see it frequently. It's not just rugby related. Look at CrossFit athletes, where you have a woman that works exceptionally hard to get as fit as she is, and she will get taken to slaughter on social media by people who are lesser, who doesn't put the amount of work in, and they would call her a man, or they would say she is on steroids, or there is always some other reason why she cannot be the athlete that she is, because she is a woman. So it's on the rise, and it's everywhere.
It often feels like greatness and, physical prowess and physical ability, the top level is just retained for the men. And if you achieve something as a woman, oh, well, you have to be either called a man, or you have to be called ugly, or you have to be called inappropriate, or whatever it is, if you are achieving those high levels. Ilse, you strike me, from what I know of you, you seem like a very secure and self-assured person. I'd say more so than most. I can imagine, though, for many people who present similar to you, or have those similar experiences, that it's a lot more difficult for them, and it would be incredibly difficult for them to cope. How do you personally cope with it? You spoke of the anxiety it creates. How do you cope with it, and would you have advice for anybody like you and how best they could cope with it?
Overconfidence is what we portray to the outside world. That's the first thing. If I allow people to see how it gets me, then I'm allowing them to win. So yes, I am confident in how I portray myself to the outside world, but it doesn't mean that it makes you question everything that you are doing. I went through a stage where I literally I didn't want to go to the gym anymore, because I felt like I'm going in there, I am lifting whatever huge amounts of weights I'm lifting, and you feel like you're getting stared at. So it creates this insecurity within you as a person, that even though you are portraying yourself as very confident outside, you are doubting everything you're doing. How can I look? What can I do to look more feminine? Now, if I try and look more feminine, I do look like a drag queen. I have tried it. It's not for me. So the big key is just remember that this is what someone else thinks of you. The first thing is, do they know me? No. Have they taken the time to get to know me? No. So will their opinion in anything matter to me apart from this interaction? No. If I answer yes to any of those things, then I'll go and rethink it. But I've said no to all of those things. So it's simply about let other people have their opinion, let them do what they want to do, and I'll do me, and I'll focus on me. Because if I focus on how other people make me feel in that position, I am going to be miserable.
So I remember when I first came across you as a rugby player was when you hit the international scene back in 2016, 2017. One of the first things that stood out to me about you wasn't how you looked, wasn't how you portrayed yourself so much, in just that you were authentically you. And I think that's something that still rings true, that you are authentically you and unapologetically you. And I think you shouldn't be expected to be anything but that, and nobody should. Why should we try to feminize ourselves or try to behave in a way that society dictates we should, when that's not who we are? And I see, in society, I think there's a lot of problems with that. We see, a hot topic at the moment is toxic masculinity, and it's these expectations of masculinity where you have to perform. You're not being authentically you. You're trying to meet these unobtainable goals of what masculinity is, and it causes so much harm. If people could be more authentically themselves, just like you are, I think we have a much better place in the world, and people would be more accepting if more people were like that. Alycia, I just want to go back to something that you touched on. You were talking about, your experience of playing against trans people in the game, and this Ruck You game that's coming up in Oslo, and how your concerns weren't for your safety. Your concerns were more so about skills on show and people's ability and what the structures of the game are and what the strategic plan is for the game. There was a study done back in 2022 by Pringle and Dennison, where players from England, Australia and Canada were interviewed. And the assumption that players felt unsafe, it was just simply not upheld. Like you, they had more concerns about how will I play, how are they going to play, what are their skill levels like, my skills. What was more important was qualities of the game and not somebody's safety. So do you think that players should have been consulted before any ban was put in place? It seems like an odd decision for World Rugby to put a ban in place when you see the likes of concussion issues and they're watering down red cards to 20 minutes when it's a huge safety issue. And then when it comes to trans women in sport, they're like, well, okay, there's been no injuries caused by trans women. There aren't very many trans women in the game, but they're a huge safety risk. Ban them all. Do you think the players' voices would have altered that in any way, or should they have been listened to?
1,000%. The players' voices would have, for sure, at least been some qualitative data to go after, but there is no data. They're not citing anything but their opinion or studies that have been done that have been taken wildly out of context, that are not actually, they're leaning on the term safety and player welfare for cis women players. But I have never felt that concern from a lot of the governing bodies that I've been under. Like, if you do want the game better for women, okay, invest in your coaches, invest in your refs, invest in your infrastructure so that there's more grassroots programs and you can get people playing younger in safer environments. Dedicate a paid person to go through your safeguarding, or in the US, your safe sport complaints that have largely gone reported but unanswered in a lot of cases. Make it so that we're paid. So I'm not having to, like, right now playing in France, I work a full-time job until 2 a.m. Central Europe time because I'm working on American hours. Like, if there was a concern about player safety, you would make it so that the investment is actually in things that make the game safer for women as individuals that are going to go play a team sport. Like, you're leaning on something, you're like, wait, no, I'm protecting you. Well, it's like, well, I don't need to protect in this way. Can you protect me in this way? Like, well, no, we can't do that, but we can do this. And I'm like, well, who asked for that? Well, I had an opinion about this one thing, so now I'm going to make it the law of the land. And I just don't believe that's a way to create policy when you have no qualitative data, you have no quantitative data, you're not funding any research into this, and not to mention that it's not an issue. If I were to pick like my top 10 issues that have affected me personally as a player, inclusion of my trans teammates and trans opponents wouldn't be there. And I think there are so many other lower hanging fruit to focus on and fix that we can all, as a player cohort, agree that are actual issues. And inclusion of trans people, or inclusion period, is not an issue in my book.
It's funny, the study that I cited there a few minutes ago, the conclusion or part of the abstract that they have, I'll quote it, is: importantly, the women and girls questioned why rugby leaders had chosen to focus their energy on protecting, in inverted commas, them from trans athletes, but had ignored serious problems which caused them direct harm, such as lack of funding, pervasive sexist and homophobic behaviour, sexual harassment and substandard coaching, and training facilities. And this is all relative to men. It goes on to say, our findings are consistent with and they have supported the position of women's sports organisations, which have called on World Rugby's male leaders to discard their blanket ban and undertake a rigorous and science-driven collaborative policy development process. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. But, I think that sums up your stance entirely. It feels like they're protecting us from unicorns when the real problems are there, are obvious. And, in some cases, they're covering up those problems and saying they're not an issue at all, in terms of issues in sexual harassment in sport, for example.
Oh, yeah.
It's it's baffling to see this much energy put into driving a ban that, like you say, simply wasn't called for. Nobody was calling for it. People don't by and large see it as a danger or an issue. There are so many other issues there. The grotesque inequality in women's sport when women and men fall under that same organisation. It's baffling to me. Ilse, your experience playing rugby and playing American football, have you heard anybody calling for such a ban?
BAFA has currently implemented it. So BAFA is the British American Football Association. So trans women are banned in BAFA, trans women are banned in the English football, soccer. Where, if you think about it, it's such a safety concern. There's not that much contact in football, soccer. The American Football Association in Ireland has banned it because the AFI has banned it. The American Football International has banned it. So again, from a player perspective, I play against. I'm a woman. I play on a men's team against men. I am. In my shoes, I stand at about 100 kilos. I am 5'11". I am not a small person. I play against men that are 6'4", 130 odd kilos, and all they're trying to do is run through me to get to my quarterback. Is that unsafe for me? Possibly. Do I play the sport because I choose to play the sport? Definitely. Will I go out there tomorrow and do it again? Of course I will. Is it going to stop me? No. So, all this thing about safety and how it is to protect women is where we need to start looking, because, yes, women need to be protected. Everybody needs to be protected. We need to be protected. Our rights need to be protected. We need to have the ability to live a life where we are free from prosecution for anything that is outside of the law or inside the law. If you murder someone, yeah, you go to jail. But you don't need to be protected in the sense that you want to play sport. It's just we need to work towards allowing people just to live their lives and expressing themselves. So that's where I'm at.
I think when it comes to rugby, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of you, there's an inherent risk with rugby, and everybody who plays it is accepting that inherent risk. We all know we could get injured. People playing at the amateur level know that it could impact their financial security and well-being. We all know it could impact our health. We all know that at the age of 60, we could be, shopping for a bungalow because we can't climb stairs. We're all well aware of this, but we do it anyway. It's about adrenaline. It's about, stepping outside our comfort zone. It's about physically challenging ourselves. It's about the camaraderie and the community as well. I think we need to look past this protecting of women, again, inverted commas, because it just doesn't seem to be really truly about protecting women. It seems to be an agenda to alienate people. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's just another agent for control, and placing boundaries on people to keep us in boxes and keep us down. Like I'm not sure what the end game here, like what's the actual point, but I don't feel more protected by this. Like I don't feel safer because of this. I feel more unheard and unlistened to, but also like not even willing to have a conversation. as a cis female in a contact sport, I don't believe that any of the decision makers are actually on our side if you're looking to ban our teammates, our support systems, our community, which is the reason why so many of us joined rugby in the first place.
And I think a large part of the decision-making process, like we said earlier, excludes us. It reminds me of a room full of men in suits making decisions about abortion laws. You know,
God, as an American, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you there. Yeah.
It needs to be always, any policy decisions always need to be inclusive of the people that you are purportedly protecting or that you are purportedly advocating on behalf of or designing a policy around. And I think this is just another example of that not happening.
Yeah. And I think I don't want to put out the illusion that it's going to be an easy process to work through, a blanket one policy fits all for all leagues everywhere and all people in all situations. But I don't think any of us got into rugby because it was easy. Like, no one would have seen a rugby game and be like, wow, that looks so easy and simple. Like, let me have a crack at that. I think that is the whole idea, is that as rugby players and admins and coaches and referees, the beauty of the game is that you're solving problems together. You're working through your issues to find the best strategy for whatever you're up against. And that's the beauty of the game. So I personally don't see the point of shying away from that.
Aggressive chess, I like to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so we will leave it there for now.
Just to interject for 1 second.
Sure.
You mentioned chess there. The International Chess Federation banned trans women from female-only events in 2023. How are they protecting anyone by doing that? It just speaks to exactly the points you were making there. It's not about protecting anyone.
It's the massive brain sizes of men, right?
Yeah.
It's
something of men.
It's so utterly condescending, isn't it?
Yes.
It's ultimate control through fear-mongering and creating a narrative by which you make women seem weak, unable to take care of themselves. It boils down to women are better off when we are uneducated, when we have no opinions about any big issues around us, because it's for our safety.
Mm-hmm.
It boils down to, and I think you saw a post I put up recently where The Handmaid's Tale is a work of fiction, not a handbook.
Yeah.
There are people in this world that needs to realize it's a work of fiction. It's not a handbook.
Yeah,
they're treating it as a guiding force, I would say. But it's like about the chess reference, I just don't understand, like, are we gonna have male and female spelling bees at some point? Like, I literally don't understand the point of like, yes, there are considerations in a contact sport. I'm not saying that, but when something is like truly memorization and mental, like, and, just knowing the origins of certain words that determine their spelling, make it make sense. It's like the math isn't mathing for me. I truly don't understand where this came from or where it's going.
And there's arguments that these trans bans, transphobia in general, is all just an extension of misogyny, and that just proves the point, doesn't it? Like, I wonder about things like a ban on trans people in chess or darts or pool or things like that, and I'm like, are we really just protecting the boys from losing to a girl? Is that so firmly rooted in them as a 6-year-old that losing to a girl is bad and a sign of weakness that they have to, at an elite level, ban women because we can't compete with them? It's like, the FA in England, probably long before the FA was established, maybe not, back in, I think it might have been the 40s or 50s, there was 57,000 spectators at a women's football match, and they went, oh, no, we can't have that, we'll ban that. So women were banned from football.
Yes.
Simply because they were drawing crowds, and the insecure men just felt a little bit threatened by that. And it's baffling to see.
Well, I think because they also see resources as a pie, as opposed to, like, resources are infinite, like, how many of us have watched, especially maybe during like a larger championship or like a World Cup or something? You have one game on your phone and one game on the TV. Like your attention is always split. Our collective attention is infinite. Our collective resources are infinite. Like it is not high. Just because I support women's sports doesn't mean I can't also support men's sports. Or if I want to watch gymnastics, this doesn't mean I can't watch track and field. Like it is a wild thing to think of. It's like a scarcity mindset of thinking everything just exists as a piece of pie, and if there's some for someone else, then there's none for you. And that's not the way we can function as a society if we want to promote and grow sport as a whole, but especially rugby, which still needs promotion worldwide.
That's an excellent point, and it really does seem to be that, with a lot of sports, soccer, rugby, for example, we're at a point where those are becoming suddenly, visibly so much more successful. So it doesn't feel like a coincidence that trans bans and probably further means to control women's sport will come in. I don't think that's a coincidence at all. This has been a wonderful, fruitful discussion. It's great to hear, some of those myths around, feeling unsafe and things blown out of the water. And it's great to see people advocating on behalf of trans people. So I'd like to thank you, Ilse and Alycia, for joining us. And thank you again for the discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to meet you all, and this was absolutely incredible. For anyone who's looking for more information on the Ruck You match, they could just head to Instagram, and there's also a GoFundMe, so I could hopefully get help with my flight and all my teammates' flights going over to support this game, and everything else will be donated to trans inclusion projects. So we're really excited for that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That conversation highlights the real-world stakes and also exposes how often the voices of players are left out of decisions supposedly made to protect them. Next, we speak to someone who's done the scientific research and lived the experience. Dr. Joanna Harper is a trans woman, a former elite distance runner, and a leading researcher on transgender athletic performance. Here's the conversation on what the evidence really says about fairness, safety, and the flaws in the models used to justify these bans.
So joining me all the way from Oregon is Dr. Joanna Harper, a researcher in exercise science. Joanna holds a bachelor's degree in physics, a master's degree in medical physics, and a PhD in exercise science with a focus on transgender athletic performance. Dr. Harper is currently a postdoctoral scholar and received her PhD from Loughborough University. Dr. Harper, I think it's safe to say you're the expert on transgender athletic performance. Can you tell us briefly about your research and the publications to date?
I'm certainly one of the leading experts, and my title certainly is Dr. Harper, but please feel free to call me Joanna.
Will do, thank you.
So I first got interested in the topic because of my own experience as a transgender athlete. I'm a distance runner. When I was young, I ran a 2:23 marathon, and within 9 months of starting hormone therapy, I was running 12% slower, and that's the difference between serious male and female distance runners. So 9 months of testosterone suppression caused me to lose my entire male advantage in distance running. And so as a scientist, that piqued my curiosity. I went on to publish the first paper looking at transgender athletic performance, and then I went on to get a PhD in exercise science at Loughborough University.
Amazing.
I published several papers on the topic. I've worked with international sports federations, and I speak often at meetings and on podcasts and etc.
It's interesting that you say within 9 months you lost all of your I suppose, male advantage. There are many claims out there at the moment that undergoing male puberty brings with it advantages, and there are many claims that cannot be reversed or mitigated for by medically transitioning or by, hormonal suppression or hormonal replacement. They argue that the physical and anthropometric advantages such as bone density, muscle mass, quantity of faster fibres and, other changes provide those advantages in strength and speed and size, and that when you try to mitigate for that, it can't be done to such a degree that it takes away that competitive advantage and therefore leads to competitive unfairness. What does the research say on this? Does it uphold what they're saying?
Well, there are three categories of male advantage and what happens to those advantages with hormone therapy. And let me run through them. The first is that some advantages are completely eliminated with hormone therapy. Certainly, as an endurance athlete, one of the most prominent is hemoglobin levels. Hemoglobin is one of the most important advantages in endurance that men have over women. And within 120 days, trans women go from typical male hemoglobin levels to typical female hemoglobin levels. That is because hemoglobin cells in the body don't live more than 120 days, and our body produces hemoglobin at a rate that's proportional to testosterone in our body. So as soon as you suppress testosterone, the hemoglobin follows very quickly. And so as an endurance athlete, that's why I noticed a very quick change in my ability to run fast. So that's one category. A second category is strength advantages. Trans women will lose muscle mass, will lose strength, but it's a slower process than the loss of hemoglobin, and it's an incomplete loss. Trans women will, in an absolute sense, even after years of hormone therapy, have higher absolute strength than cisgender women. But when you look at the strength in an absolute, or sorry, a relative or pound for pound or kilogram per kilogram matter, then it appears, and there are now, I don't know, a dozen or so papers that suggest that trans women have similar pound for pound strength as cis women. And so in the sport of athletics, for instance, absolute strength matters if one is throwing a discus. Relative strength matters if one is doing a jumping event. And one of the standard exercise tests is a counter movement jump, and it's similar to vertical height measurements. And trans women don't jump any higher than cis women. And so if we're talking about a sport like rugby, for instance, things like moving your body fast, which is important. It's unlikely that trans women are any faster than cis women, are able to move around the pitch any quicker. But if it comes to pushing in a scrum, trans women are likely to have some advantage there even after hormone therapy. How much of an advantage is not clear, but there would definitely be some remaining advantage. Then thirdly, there are categories such as height, which aren't affected by height or body mass, which aren't affected by hormone therapy. Trans women have height and body mass numbers which are similar to cisgender men even after hormone therapy. And certainly in a sport like rugby, size matters depending on the position. Of course, there's a substantial heterogeneity in the size of rugby players depending on what position one is looking at. And so trans women playing in women's rugby are more likely to occupy the big positions, right? Because they're bigger. But are trans women who play rugby bigger and stronger than the other women who play in the big and strong positions? That's unknown. There's also a question of potential safety. If two people collide on a rugby pitch, it's more likely that the smaller of those persons will get hurt than the larger of those persons. And so there's a possible safety issue there. One of the things, I was part of the meeting with World Rugby in 2020 when that led to World Rugby banning trans women from the women's category at international levels. And one of the things that I urged them to do was to do a study to see if there was any greater injury risk for cis women when they play against trans women. And they declined to do so. Rather, they adopted a theoretical approach that basically said because trans women are bigger, there is a greater theoretical risk, and that is good enough for us. And I certainly disagree. I disagreed at the time. I disagree 5 years later. I think that if they're going to suggest that trans women do result in a greater injury risk for cis women, test that theory. And they didn't, unfortunately.
It's interesting that you point out that World Rugby policy was motivated by that theoretical model and that they declined to go further and actually gather data. Do you think that based on that there should be a study done in sort of in collision sports or contact sports to determine whether, like you said, pound for pound, if strength advantages that are retained are inherently dangerous to cis women playing the sport? And do you think it is inappropriate for theoretical models to be used as a blanket ban for trans athletes?
Yes, to both of those. Of course, it's really hard to do studies once you ban trans women from the sport. But yes, of course, I think that the more science we can gather on trans women in sports, in terms of their performance, safety, all of those things, that the more data that can be gathered, the better. And certainly there's nothing wrong with using theoretical models, but I don't think that should be the be-all and end-all of the science.
Sure. We discussed the topic with some players as part of this podcast, and a lot of them spoke about wanting the challenge and inclusion mattering more than safety, and that they don't feel necessarily unsafe, and that the World Rugby policy didn't seek the opinion or the consent of the players that they were purporting to safeguard. And they claim on the basis of this theoretical model that there is a welfare issue. I think for me it's a little bit jarring because World Rugby have a major and much publicised issue at the moment with concussions in sport and the damage that CTE causes, the long-term brain health of athletes. And while they have that major issue and it is proven to damage athletes long-term and is a proven welfare risk, they're still not mitigating for it. And yet, based on a theoretical model of welfare, they're excluding trans people, a blanket ban. You're unsafe, you're out. It seems to me to be a bit of a contradiction in terms that safety matters on one hand and safety doesn't matter on the other hand. Do you think that there's a political motivation behind the ban on trans athletes and that a theoretical model is good enough, like you said? Or do you think this is a genuine safeguarding issue?
I'm not in a position to question the motives of the people who run World Rugby, but I certainly don't think that a theoretical model is sufficient to ban an entire group of people from a sport that they love. And there are many benefits of playing in sports for everyone, and there are people who have rugby type bodies, and for them, rugby is their sport, and just as my sport is distance running because I have a distance running type body, people who enjoy and love rugby, I think there should try to be solutions so that those people can play the sport they love. Now, in terms of the political issue, and again, I don't want to judge any of the people running World Rugby. I met some of them and they seemed like very fine people. It is undoubtedly true that there is a substantial political aspect to this. It is sad to say, but even in the 21st century, there are still a lot of people who don't like queer people. And until about 2015 or so, the focus in North America and in Western Europe of those people was to prevent same-sex marriage. And they spent an incredible amount of money to try to prevent same-sex marriage laws in North America and Western Europe. And they lost that fight. And they didn't suddenly decide that they liked queer people. They didn't stop fundraising, and they needed a new target. And trans people, and especially trans women in sport, has become this new target and has been very politically successful for them. And we have seen that it has gone, certainly in the United States and UK especially, it has gone well beyond that, where laws and rulings against trans people in general, not just in sports, have become the norm in both of these countries. And certainly it's gone beyond that, where pride festivals have been canceled, and in the state of Florida in the United States, they have don't say gay laws, and these have all resulted from this push that started with a push against trans women in sport, but they have used this as leverage to move beyond it step by step. And it is clear what the goal of these people is. It is to erase trans and queer people.
It's interesting that you say that, and you mark 2015 as kind of a turning point. Here in Ireland, we had a marriage referendum 10 years ago this week, where the public voted in favour of marriage equality. And at the time, there was a lot of political voices, or voices for balance in the media that were very much homophobic, and that seems to have translated into transphobia here as well. And it's interesting that in or around the same time as the marriage equality vote came in, we got gender recognition, self-recognition, where you could change your gender legally. And there was no uproar at the time because the focus was on gay people and gay marriage at the time. Nobody seemed to have an issue with gender recognition. It wasn't a big thing in the media. It hasn't caused the sky to collapse or any of these claims that they might have. And yet, it, like you said, it does seem to be the new focus. It has shifted from one topic to another and one target within the queer community to another. And it's interesting to see that you're seeing the same thing. Joanna, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your expertise, and it's very interesting to talk to somebody who knows the science and the data so well, but also personal experience. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
So, what happens when policy becomes personal? For Alix, the RFU's 2022 trans ban wasn't just a headline, it was a loss. Ailsa spoke to her about what rugby meant to her, what the ban took away, and why taking the field in Oslo is about more than just sport.
Hi Alix, thank you for joining me. Firstly, tell me about yourself. What makes you interesting or, in fact, uninteresting?
Well, facts. I'm 56. I'm Irish. I'm from South County Dublin. I have degrees in physics and chemistry, an MBA and a PhD in physics. I have taught and worked in universities in rural New York, which was hoot. It genuinely was. I have worked in Washington State. I've been in London since Tony Blair was elected, which was 97, 98, something like that. The year of Blur and Oasis and all of that. Cool Britannia. So I'm not a terribly interesting person. I have a job in data and AI. I'm in the tech industry. So I work with those new and exciting technologies that are not as exciting as people think they are when you explain them in great detail. What they can do is interesting. What they are, well, interesting, but only to a very specific set of people. I'm married to the lovely Anne. We have 2 cats and a cottage in the country. We grow vegetables, and I have a gym, and I train in the gym. I used to play rugby, which I thought was really interesting. The bit that sometimes people find interesting is that I'm trans is I think is the least interesting thing about me.
Can you tell me about your passions and your principles?
Well, by principles, it's a tough question because that's very, I suppose, dependent on what you're talking about. But politically, I would be left-wing. But I mean, the guiding principle is try not to be an ass. Just genuinely try not to be an ass and leave life a little bit better than you found it. And honestly, if you don't like somebody, if you don't like people, leave them alone. You don't have to get involved in things you don't like or don't approve of, but just generally leave people alone. What are my passions? Apparently I'm a gym bunny. I only discovered this late in life when I had an episode where I thought I had a stroke, a TIA, transient ischemic attack. And that was very shocking, but it turns out that was epilepsy. And that was, one of those major life moments where I just decided, oh, sod it. Life is short, just get on and do those things. And I'd always looked at rugby and thought, I can play that now. I could never do it when I was a kid because men's sports weren't really a place for me. But honestly, when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, I can do this now. I've transitioned. I can play sport because I feel like I can find a place in sport and I want to do this. So I did. I went off, found myself a PT, trained for a year, started with tag rugby and then found East London and started playing full contact rugby. And I discovered that I'm super competitive. I enjoy training. I train twice a week at the rugby club. And most of the days in between, I was in the gym in some form or another trying to get myself into shape because by God was that difficult to get into shape. So that I suppose you could call a passion. I mean, I still train now, but it just doesn't have the same flavour.
How do you think those closest to you would describe you?
Well, according to the lovely Anne, I can be a pain in the ass. According to some of my friends, I've used words like badass, competitive, resilient, lovely, assertive, chippy, direct, opinionated. Thank you, Mum. I didn't lick that off a stick. You can always flip these around and use words like, rather than assertive, you can say aggressive. Rather than opinionated, you can say argumentative. But different strokes for different folks, and you see these things differently depending on how people see you. One thing, though, that sometimes you get honest feedback from people that know you less. And I've had some people leave my team at work, and one of them on their way out the door said, I've really enjoyed working with you and for you because you've made a safe space for me to be me in, and I really appreciate that, which I thought was super flattering because I suppose it means I wasn't being an ass.
In the past, you've described rugby as a demented and stupid game, which I can't disagree. Can you tell me what has been your rugby playing journey?
My rugby playing journey? Well, when I was a kid growing up, I was 70s, 80s in Dublin. I'm never a really super sporty kid. I, even at one stage at school, taught myself how to throw the javelin so I could dodge team sports because Gaelic hurling really wasn't my thing. I was always fascinated by rugby, by international rugby. Come up every February in the rain and you would watch it on TV, and my father would sit by the fire and a cup of coffee and a scone and we would watch the rugby, and that was the only sport I was really interested in. And the people that I dragged back from those times, like Fergus Slattery, they still are sporting heroes for me. But I always avoided sports because I never felt like I fitted in. We can fast forward a long, long time back to 2017, 2018, when I had let's call it an episode. It turned out that it was actually epilepsy, but it was one of those moments in life where you kind of go, oh, bloody hell, because initially they thought it was a stroke. So that was the time where I kind of went, okay, time to seize life, just do some stuff, don't have any regrets. Went and got myself a PT, got myself fit, started playing tag rugby, discovered that non-contact rugby really wasn't good for somebody as slow as me. And I discovered East London and Rugby Union, and I discovered that I wasn't very good at it, but I enjoyed it immensely. So it became a huge thing in my life. I just enjoyed everything about it. I enjoyed how difficult it was, how much I had to push myself. There was training once, twice a week. There was the days I wasn't down running around a pitch trying to figure out what in God's name I was supposed to be doing. I was in a gym lifting things or running on things. It just became, I just discovered a part of myself that wasn't known to me beforehand. It was a massive journey of self-discovery, and it was in this stupid, violent, ridiculous game, and it is genuinely a ridiculous game.
Okay, so obviously you've had a wonderful time learning to play rugby. How has it impacted your life so far?
Well, clearly it's been a learning experience. Clearly it's been I mean, just bar the fun and the comradeship you find in people, and then all of a sudden you find people who've got your back, and you've got people who you can call a friend, and all of those things. A part of life I never had before because I never did team sports. I never interacted with the world like that because I never really felt comfortable in myself, and all of a sudden there was this place where you felt like you belonged, even if it only was for 80 minutes on a Sunday. You just felt properly connected to the world and the people around you, and it was hugely powerful and hugely empowering because you found you didn't have to listen to other people telling you how to be, that you didn't have to be skinny, that you could actually be quick and fast and small and quick and aggressive, or you could be large and strong and slow. And all of these things were fine and good. And that's hugely powerful to discover, that you don't have to look like something off the pages of Vogue to be accepted. You don't have to subscribe to somebody else's definition of who and what you are. And that is hugely important.
So back in 2022, when the trans ban came into effect in England, how did that impact you, your social life, and your overall health and well-being?
I've used this expression before. That was the second worst thing that's ever happened to me. It's certainly that I can remember. In some ways, it seems like a very strange thing to say, that it was so impactful, but when you stand in my shoes and you look out, it's a thing that you have to put a callus over so that you don't feel that. There's a recording I made at the time that I still haven't ever watched or listened to because the emotion and the hurt is still too raw, and I don't think that will ever go away. It's just calloused over, and when something happens to you in life that generates a callus like that, it's really difficult because it's not just something that's personal, but it makes you suspicious of people. It makes you look around you and you just kind of think, well, what are you people really thinking? It's the only way I can describe this, and it's something that's kind of fresh in my mind, is last night when we were driving home, my lovely wife Anne was catering the charity do at the rugby club, and I was helping her out, and we were driving home, and there was a road rage incident where some gentleman decided, because it will be a gentleman, won't it, not to lean into the stereotype, decided that he wanted to get past me. So when I found a place to pull over, clearly I hadn't pulled over quickly enough for him. So he did the whole thing of he drove along beside me for a while and tried to run me off the road. He pulled in front of me and brake checked me. Then when I actually pulled off at my turning, he actually reversed back on the dual carriageway and cut across the hatch line to get in front of me and weave across the road and slam his brakes on and all that sort of stuff. And you see that aggression in people all the time. You just don't know anymore how people are going to react to you. And the feeling you take away from an incident like that you carry around with you all the time. That sense of being under attack, being somehow the people are out to get you. And when you roll forward these years and you see the conversations that are going on, the rulings that are coming down, it doesn't make any of that go away. It just drives home the fact that there are some people out there that just dislike you for being you. And that's a hugely difficult thing to process. I mean, I came from a massively privileged background. I'm white, I'm Irish, I have all the education you can have. I have a lovely, wonderful, supportive family. We grew up resolutely middle class in South Dublin. And to find that the world is that cruel is a really difficult thing. I used, something I was talking to somebody, I used a quote from a song. The song's called Blood Makes Noise, and it's about that noise in your head, that rage, that sense of being in a wind tunnel and the world is screaming at you. And that's what it felt like then, and that's what it feels like now. You learn to live with it, you learn to cope with it, but it's not going away and it's not getting any easier. On a really practical level, rugby gave me a purpose and a drive outside of all the other things in life. It was something I did purely for me, and it got me out of bed some mornings. It was the thing that I could say, this describes how I feel about myself and about life. And that's kind of, I wouldn't say gone, because clearly I'm going to go play rugby in Oslo. But the world seems like a meaner, smaller, crueler place.
Discussions like this are important. The current players and the impact of policy decisions that are made for them are often missing from this discussion. Humanity and empathy is often forgotten. I hope that we have gone some way to including some of those voices. It is evident that decisions made back in 2021 didn't have a broad and applicable evidence base, but rather used a theoretical model to justify their ban on trans women's participation. The reality is, women's rugby has organically become a haven for people who don't adhere to gender expectations, and it's a place where diversity is the bedrock of the community. The trans ban conflicts with the culture of our game. It directly harms both trans and cis women alike, and it undermines why we were all there in the first place. At a minimum, we would expect World Rugby to begin a policy review, to engage in research to determine if the theoretical model is in fact accurate, and to engage in a consultation with those whose welfare the policy purports to safeguard. On June 1st, the Ruck You game aims to dispel the overly simplistic and reductive myths and show the real complexity of the topic not only supports trans inclusion in our game, but so does the elite rugby community. Please, get behind this cause and show your support by donating via the GoFundMe link in the show notes. Again, thank you to all our wonderful guests and contributors, and of course, our wonderful producer, Cian O'Miller. Please like, subscribe, and rate our lovely little podcast. Until next time, keep on rucking.